You wanted me to talk a little bit about the coronavirus situation in Australia, um, which is a very difficult subject to talk about actually because it's a little bit all over the place. I guess it started, well, obviously, we'd heard about the situation in initially China and then Italy and then Spain. But the first indication that things, I guess, were getting a little bit strange here was the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. I'm sure it will go down in history. Basically, people saw what was happening overseas and decided to buy as much toilet paper as possible. And that meant that there was almost entirely no toilet paper in the country for anyone apart for the 5%, as far as I could tell, that were hoarding garages full of it. I wasn't able to buy toilet paper myself for over a month. Luckily, I had a bit of a reserve and I actually lent toilet paper to someone who then lent some back to me. So it was almost like an illicit drug trade almost. It was quite strange. And this was before, if memory serves me right, this was before restrictions had even, any kind of restrictions had taken place in Australia. People just freaked out and panic bought toilet paper. Um, there may have been better things to buy, but I think if the apocalypse rather does come, I guess it's all better if we have clean bottoms to face that. Anyway, then look, to be honest, the chronological order of everything is it's difficult for me to piece together. Actually, I should have kept a diary because one thing blends into another, and so much was changing from day to day, and what you're hearing, and what the press was saying, what the politicians were saying. But I think it started to come to a bit of a head in Victoria, the state I'm in, obviously, probably around a month ago now, where the Premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews, as opposed to the Prime Minister of Australia, came out on a Sunday, I think it was, and said that all non-essential services in Victoria would be shut by the following Tuesday, which was 2 days later. So basically, Monday, which was the day following Sunday, obviously, people thought that everything was going to be shut on Tuesday. So there was scenes of chaos. There were near riots at Officeworks and Harvey Norman in some instances, where people were just trying to buy as much as they could, not knowing what the future actually held. As it turns out, non-essential services ended up being gyms and movie theatres and maybe a couple of other things. And it really goes to the heart of how the message has been really, in my opinion, quite rubbish. Maybe nationwide, but particularly in Victoria, where what politicians tell us and what the media tells us is often contradicted a day or two later. The ban on non-essential services, as was Daniel Andrews had said on that Sunday about a month ago, ended up being complete gibberish. There was no ban on non-essential services. There were some very conditional bans, and I think they did implement a ban of more than 100 people couldn't congregate. But basically, it was business as normal, really, as far as I could tell. Look, the ban may have included nightclubs and bars. I'm not sure if that came later, to be honest, or it may have come at that same time. But in any case, non-essential services to me means almost what Spain and Italy are under. It's you go to the supermarket, you go to the doctor, you go to the pharmacy, and that's it. You don't go to the shops, you don't go to the shopping centre, you don't look for new shoes, you don't look for new clothes, you don't go to Harvey Norman and try to buy a new laptop. Your non-essential services are non-essential services. Well, that's the way I read it anyway. So there was a lot of confusion around that. And then, like I say, I can't really remember when things have happened or not happened, but now we're in a situation in Victoria and pretty much nationwide where they have introduced more stringent bans. But here again, it's all over the shop because they're banning. So not you can't. It's something like and it's confusing even this part of it. It's like you can't have a gathering of more than two or three people, but it's confusing because if you I don't know if you go to your sister's house or brother's house or mother's house or father's house and there's potentially three or four other people there already, does that mean you can't go? I don't really know, to be honest. But there's some very strange and arbitrary things they've come up with, like L platers. And again, Daniel Andrews, and this is probably going back to a week or two now, where he made a statement through the media that you were not allowed to see your boyfriend or girlfriend. And he made a big song and dance about how, it's a non-essential service and you don't need to be seeing your girlfriend or boyfriend. But you could go to Bunnings. I went to Bunnings like last week and there was no shortage of people. You can go to a shopping centre, albeit most of the shops are closed, most of them voluntarily, by the way, because there's no ban on clothes shops being closed. But I did go to Northland, and most of the shops were closed. But as far as I could tell, most of that was done voluntarily as opposed to being mandated. So Harvey Norman is open, JB Hi-Fi is open, Bunnings is open. There's a whole heap of places that are open, but according to the Premier, you couldn't see your girlfriend or boyfriend, which was utterly ridiculous. And in fact, I don't know if he officially retracted that himself, but it became common knowledge that that was no longer the case. But how you get to a point where a Premier goes out of his way to make that statement and then retract it is bizarre in itself. L-platers. They find an L-plater for driving because an L-plater driving is not necessary in this time of crisis. But if you're an L-plater, presumably you're still living with your parents. And if you're living with your parents, why wouldn't you be able to practice driving when the roads are mostly empty? By the way, there's no work apart from like hospitality, like bars, restaurants, and gyms and movie theaters, as I said earlier. Pretty much all businesses are permitted to operate as normal, as far as I can tell. Whether they do or not is another question, because obviously there's a whole domino effect economically with what's happening. So lots of businesses are, reducing staff or closing, so you can't go to restaurants, you can't go to cafes, you can't go to bars, but you can get takeaway from a restaurant if it remains open, or you can get takeaway coffee, but you can't sit down at the cafe. So obviously this has a flow-on effect on people who work in cafes and restaurants and bars and gyms and movie theaters. And also, oh, sorry, I should have, this is probably one of the main points. School was terminated. So, oh man, I've forgot a bunch of stuff. Sorry. All sporting events were cancelled. So the AFL, which is huge in not all of Australia, but probably 60 to 70% of the country, no AFL. Completely, there's no AFL football. There's no rugby. So all sporting events have been cancelled. Schools were schools. I think it kind of varied state to state. Some schools in some states remained open, and there hasn't been a universal national kind of systematic approach. It's kind of part mandated by the federal government, and then the individual states then, from what I can tell, have a fair bit of leeway in what they can do and can't do, which I think contrasts significantly to what's happening in many other parts of the world, where it's very much a centralized federal government saying this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. There's a lot of grey area between what the states are saying and what the actual government, the central government of Australia, is saying. There seems to be lots of grey area. State to state, there seems to be different things that are happening in one state versus another. So it actually is very confusing. But to backtrack, there was because I think I mentioned this earlier. There was a situation where, yeah, I did, of course. I was talking about the L platers. They were finding L platers. Well, I'm not sure if they were finding the L platers or their guardian or whoever was in the car with them, because it was considered non-essential. But like I say, you can go to Bunnings with 400 other people, and apparently that's essential because it remains open. And even just walking around, I mean, there's plenty of people in parks. There's plenty of people walking their dogs and plenty of people socializing, frankly. You're not supposed to have groups of more than 3 people or 2 people. I can't remember if it's 2 or 3, to be honest, but it's definitely not more than 3. I can tell you, pardon me, I can tell you that I saw definitely more, there were groups of more than 3 people talking. However, apparently the state government has given out, I think, 1,000 fines for people breaking the social rules and things like the L platers. But going back to the L platers, I think that's been retracted now, because I've literally seen more L platers on the road than I've ever seen, which makes sense, because if you're not going to school and you can't really do anything, well then why wouldn't you practice your driving with your parents? Of course you would. There was this other ridiculous thing where you couldn't go to cemeteries at all, even if you were just one person. So if you were one person and you wanted to go take flowers to a loved one, you couldn't do that. But you can go to Bunnings and mix with 400 other people, no problem. So again, I mean, there seems to be very little rhyme or reason to a lot of this stuff. I mean, for me personally, I'm probably not completely up to speed as much as other people, because I don't have kids going to school. I am permitted to work for what I do. It's not doesn't come under the restrictions. And obviously, it's difficult. You can't really catch up with people at a restaurant or get a coffee after work or something, because all that's shut unless you're doing takeaway. But people are reluctant to see other people, frankly, because there is concern about the actual disease itself. It's not just about what the government is trying to tell you to do or not do. So obviously people are very concerned about their own personal health, and there's massive there's massive ramifications if you do get it, because it could destroy your livelihood. It could destroy your business. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening with people who are coming back into the country now. They're only letting citizens or permanent residents back into the country. That's my understanding. And you have to go to a hotel, which the government pays um, for 2 weeks to quarantine, and you can't leave the room at all. And they will not do any laundry. So basically, you're in a hotel room. If you want clean clothes, you have to wash them in the sink yourself, provided you can get some laundry powder, which I'm not sure if they're providing. And food is just whatever they bring you. So if it's not enough or it's horrible, well, bad luck for you. A man was actually sent to jail recently because he was caught leaving his hotel room under quarantine to see his girlfriend, and he did this on a few occasions, and he was caught, and he was actually sentenced to jail. I'm not sure for how long, to be honest. You could probably look that up, but it's. I think it's very different to the situation in Spain and Europe, where you literally have 7, 8, 900 people dying a day, and you're virtually on house arrest. You can't leave the house at all, really, unless you're doing grocery shopping once a week, or at least that's what I've understood of the situation over there. Here, you still have a lot of freedom. I mean, you can get in a car and just drive around and do whatever you want, really, just as long as you're within the guidelines. If you want to, drive to see someone, provided it's not a gathering, then you can do that. Although the Premier said you couldn't see your girlfriend or boyfriend, but then that changed. So I don't know. I think you can, and there's no real attempt to really police that. I mean, I don't think there's any at the moment any attempt to stop people at street corners and say, well, why are you entering this street? What's your business here? Although they have broken up some house parties, so people doing house parties, and they've been caught, and yeah, you get fined and you get in trouble with the police. But if you're going to work, you can still, if your work is still open, you can still go to work. You can still get food. Most cafes and eateries that would trade during the day are still open. So I mean, it's a simple thing, but I think it's a big difference compared to, say, Spain, where you can't really do anything. You can't leave the house. I mean, you sent me, or I think your dad sent me a photo of, you've got the military patrolling the streets for people, just going for a walk. I mean, you can go for a walk. You can go for a run. You can ride your bike. You can do a lot of stuff. But there's this grey area where you can't congregate and you have to have social distancing. And there's been a lot of teething problems. And there's been many instances where police have wrongly given fines, or people have gotten in trouble when they shouldn't have. I don't know. To be honest, I don't really 100% know what we're supposed to be doing and not doing. But I think we can do more than you guys anyway. Well, at least for the time being. The death rate in Australia is very low at the moment. The disease seems to be contained, which is very strange to me, because you still have, as last time I checked, which was a couple of days ago, I think you still got 600-700 people dying a day in Spain and Italy, and people being locked up for a month. So actually, you could probably answer this question for me. How is it so many people are still dying in Europe when people have been locked in their houses for over a month. I mean, have people been sick for a month and now they're dying, or are people still contracting the virus somehow? I don't really get that. I would have thought the death rate would have just come down to almost nothing at this point. But in terms of Australia and our death rate, it's very low. The new cases per day has really dropped, and yes, we haven't come into our flu season yet, which is going to be soon, particularly for the southern states. Whether that changes things or not, I'm not sure. I think the key thing for the government, in my opinion, is just be very careful about who you let into the country. And at this point, just continue the policy of only citizens and permanent residents, and continue the policy of 2 weeks of self quarantine. Well, initially it was like you go home and you're meant to self quarantine, but I think so many people were cheating that they then said, no, we're putting you in a hotel room and you're not leaving your room. So that's something that's changed, from whenever it was. Again, I lose track of time. I think it was about a month ago that change happened, maybe 3 weeks ago. There's probably a bunch of stuff I left out. I feel like I'm rambling. I feel like I could have streamlined this a lot more, but anyway, I hope that's helpful. And yeah, take care and drink lots of orange juice, which has a lot of vitamin C, which is good for you.